Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie.
Welcome back, and it's time to have a look at what's happening globally. And glad to be joined as usual by Thomas Conway of the Nina Guardian. Good morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning, Fran.
And good to see you today. Ahead of Mr. Zelensky's visit to Ireland, we're going to speak about that corruption scandal that cost him his top 8, his chief of staff, and a personal friend, obviously.
Andrei Yermak, indeed, a very close friend. They used to go to the gym together. He's said to have an almost mystical influence over Zelensky. They were that close. Their lives were intertwined, and they developed a friendship, I think, in show business. They were both in show business. Zelensky, obviously, an actor, a comedian. Yeah. He was a lawyer of some sort, and he was appointed chief of staff in 2020 when Zelensky attained the presidency, and he has been at his side consistently throughout the invasion.
And the timing is really unfortunate because Mr. Yermak involved in the peace negotiations.
Yeah, just last Sunday we were watching him in those peace negotiations in Geneva, making statements alongside Rubio, and now he has decided to go. Effectively, I think he has been sacked. Essentially, his role was not tenable, and it all relates to a corruption scandal involving Ukraine's nuclear agency, or commercial. It's a commercial. It's a company called Energoatom. A kickback scheme. Kickbacks are illegal payments worth up to $100 million. Now, that is a staggering amount of money, particularly when you consider that Ukraine is struggling for finance on the front lines and that. You know, this money could be used in other ways.
And money pouring in from other countries into
Indeed, and it is an especially bad look. And, you know, we've had kind of a series of events in the past week. We had that US-Russian authored peace plan, which might be described as a Russian wish list. And I think one of the reasons that plan emerged was Vladimir Putin sensed that Zelensky is under pressure here. This corruption scandal, and corruption has plagued Ukraine historically in the past, but, it has come to bear on him now. Donald Trump is desperate for a deal, and Putin obviously attempted to exert his influence, and himself and Witkoff, or Kirill Dmitriev, a Russian advisor, and Witkoff hatched this 28-point plan which emerged last week. Now, the Europeans tore it apart and put their own clauses in. It will be very interesting what the Russian response to that is. I saw again Rubio last night with the Ukrainian delegation in Miami in Florida. And the music was positive enough from there, but I suppose it is all contingent on what the Russians make of it and what their demands are.
And in terms of this corruption, I mean, is there any indication that it goes further than Yermak? I mean, it's very hard to believe that it will be just one man.
Yeah, it is likely to be. It seems pervasive, doesn't it? I mean,
is there any chance that Zelensky can be touched by this in some way?
I think he has been stained to a certain degree already, but if he is directly implicated, now it's... it would be hard to see, but I mean, it really does damage his credibility. I mean, he has emerged as kind of this heroic wartime leader over the past few years, but this really damages his credibility at a time when war fatigue is rampant throughout Ukraine. The Ukrainian.
So how is he viewed by his own people at this point?
There are mixed opinions. I think, if there were an election tomorrow, the guy who many see as Zelensky's successor, perhaps, or the guy to replace him, is the current ambassador to the UK, the former head of the armed forces, Valery Zaluzny. Now, he was a wartime general, as I say, head of the armed forces, and he developed huge stature throughout the course of the war. Zelensky then, sidelined him and gave him the role of ambassador to the UK. He had a very interesting piece in the UK Telegraph yesterday, which was referenced by the US Senator Lindsey Graham, very close to Donald Trump, but essentially making demands like Ukraine must join NATO. And of course, Lindsey Graham said that is not, feasible at this point.
I can't see how that could ever happen with
No. when you consider that is, I suppose, one of the root causes that Vladimir Putin, or the so-called root causes that he talks about.
The expansion of NATO.
The expansion of NATO. Now, I thought for a period last week when that plan was altered, well, maybe could they do a swap? Could you trade the Donbass region for NATO membership or something like that? But that's probably unworkable as well. The Europeans are, as I said, put forward new proposals. Zelensky is visiting Macron in Paris today before he comes to Ireland tomorrow. That will be a crucial meeting. There have been talks with Merz and Starmer as well, and those three are really the crucial forces from a European perspective.
And if I was to say to you, look into a crystal ball in terms of the attempt at a peace process here, well, I'm not hopeful about it, I have to say, Thomas. Are you?
Yeah, well, I was looking at the Russian economy over the past few days and it has built a fortress economy, a war economy, and wage growth is high, unemployment is low, and although sanctions on things like oil are biting, I guess, it has survived this far, and it will probably survive longer.
Well, Russian oil is still being bought.
It is, yeah, despite Trump did issue sanctions on two major oil companies, but Russian oil is still being bought. And Russia seems to have this infinite supply of soldiers, which is, in many ways, it's appalling because they're just thrown into the meat grinder. That's the strategy they use. It's called the meat grinder tactic. And they sacrifice these soldiers for minimal gains on the battlefield. But Ukraine does not have that endless supply of troops. And that is, and also Russia having earlier been on the wrong side of the drone war, Russia is now winning that drone war, and there's something like 70-80% of casualties on the front line are being inflicted by drones. Now that is staggering, because at the start of this war it was more of a conventional conflict where you had two armies at the front lines digging at each other. Now it's turned highly sophisticated. You have drones being used. And then I suppose you have all these Russian flight incursions into NATO airspace, Vladimir Putin kind of poking NATO and poking Europe, ships coming across our waters and things like that. I think it's very scary. But in terms of the prospects of a peace deal, you'd have to be sceptical.
All right, Tom, so let me take a break. We'll be back with more global news in just a moment. You're welcome back to our global news slot, and Thomas Conway is still with me. Can we move to what's happening in Venezuela at the moment there, and Mr. Trump's threats to Venezuela?
Threats on Truth Social, and you would not have wanted to be or have wanted to be in a plane above Venezuela yesterday afternoon, because he issued a very direct call on Truth Social that effectively Venezuelan airspace was closed. Consider it closed, he essentially said. And apparently he talked to the Venezuelan leader, Nicolas Maduro, who is a dictator, who did steal the last election. Apparently he talked with him in a phone call and they couldn't come to an agreement. But really, this whole crisis in Latin America, I think, boils down to two things. Trump and America want regime change in Venezuela. They want Maduro kicked out of power. He's a socialist, he's a left-wing socialist, and they are not okay with that. The second is Venezuela has the largest proven oil resources, or one of the largest proven oil resources on the planet, and Trump is eager to get some of that coveted oil and I suppose to enrich America with it. So I think those are the two motivations. He says the motivation is the narco threat, the drugs that are apparently coming in from Venezuela. But all the statistics seem to suggest that those drug flows of cocaine and that don't really come from Venezuela. They come from Colombia and other Latin American countries. I've no doubt some of it comes from Venezuela to an extent.
So is that a cover for?
I think it looks like a cover. And I mean, they have done all sorts of things. They've deployed the USS Gerald R. Ford to the region. That's the world's largest aircraft carrier. Thousands of troops and manpower and military infrastructure in the seas around Venezuela. And then you had the targeting of ships in the Pacific. Up to 80 killed, 20-something ships being targeted in what look for all the world like extrajudicial killings. So it's on a precipice as we stand. And although I should emphasise that Nicolas Maduro did steal the last election, or he is reported to have stolen the last election. And Venezuela would probably be a better country without him. I'm not sure this is the way to go about toppling him.
Of course, there is a precedent for this, where our American friends are concerned. What about the role of Congress in this? Have they any say in this?
Yeah, well, a number of representatives, Marjorie Taylor Greene being one of them, has said that Congress has the sole power to declare war. Chuck Schumer referenced that as well, and he's right there. But I mean, the Trump administration's ability to defy all these laws has been staggering to date. You know, they have just completely ignored the rule book in many respects, and they will probably unearth some, interpretation of presidential power that will allow them to strike. But if he goes into Venezuela, I'm not sure it will be well received by the American public, because as you mentioned there is precedent for foreign interventions in America, and
just a little, a little, and the designation as well of the Cartel de los Soles,
yes.
As a foreign terrorist organisation.
Yeah, that gives the US broader powers to sanction it and to try to dismantle it, I guess.
Okay.
The Cartel de los Soles, Nicolas Maduro is said to be the head of that, and obviously the US wants to do everything in its power to effectively incinerate it, to dismantle it. So yeah, it has designated that a foreign terrorist organisation.
Well, let's move on to what's happening in the UK and, of course, their budget. Alarming stuff happening.
Yeah, and Britain is kind of in a state of economic decline. Like, it remains the financial capital of Europe. London is the financial capital of Europe.
The city, as they say.
The city, indeed. But things like, and I was looking at it over the weekend, productivity, economic growth. What Britain sorely needs is economic growth. It needs to be an attractive place for investment, and of course it has not been since Brexit and the instability of the Brexit years. But last week Rachel Reeves unveiled a new budget, and by all accounts it probably wasn't radical enough, because Britain's budgetary finances need a radical overhaul. Now, she did things, I think it was a budget intended to please factions of her own Labour Party, the backbenchers in particular.
In terms of spending, is it?
In terms of spending. It's spent on things. Now, they did things like they abolished the two-child benefit cap, which
I didn't even realise that was there.
Yeah, and apparently it was a bone of contention amongst Labour peers, but that will probably go down well amongst the majority of people. It means if you have more than two children, obviously,
you get paid for each.
You will get paid for each of them, and I suppose it's only right and fair. But as I say, radical change is needed. She made a funny move on tax. She froze the tax bands until 2028, 2029. So that actually, while it doesn't explicitly, it creates a different impression, because what that actually is a tax rise, because the tax bands don't move with inflation, and people's salary is likely to increase and they'll move into a higher band of tax. So that's in an attempt to raise more money for the Exchequer.
But was it prudent, though? Was it a prudent budget?
It's hard to call it prudent. I mean, I'll put my economics hat on. It needs to restore. Britain needs to restore its credibility big time. I'll tell you what wasn't prudent: the fact that the Office for Budgetary Responsibility accidentally released the budget half an hour before she made the speech in the House of Commons. I mean, that was, while not a fatal error, it was a pretty humiliating error to make. So that is another aspect to it. But there was a bit of superficiality to it.
And in terms of the fight against reform, and I suppose to a lesser degree the Greens then, so right and left, where does the budget stand in that conversation?
I think it will cede more ground to both reform and the Greens, because I think, as I say, something radical is needed, and Labour have kind of put it off now. And people who are disenfranchised and disaffected will say, well, we're not getting the leadership we thought we would from Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and co. And therefore we're going to float towards the extremes. We'll float towards Nigel Farage on the one side, or the Green Party and Zach Balansky, who is a very charming new leader of the Green Party. I saw him interviewed yesterday. He's a little bit like Zoran Mamdani in terms of where his politics comes from. But he will court voters to a greater extent even than the Lib Democrats and that. So, Britain and the Labour Party especially are in a poor place. The Conservatives, Kemi Badenoch came out yesterday and she lambasted the government for their policy failures, etc., etc. But she doesn't entirely convince me either. And the Conservatives, the polling reflects that.
Pope Leo, first foreign trip. What are you making of that? Because he's been quiet. He's been
quiet. I think he's engaging in a very delicate form of diplomacy. He was in Turkey.
The conservative aspect of the church and maybe the more progressive aspect.
Yeah, whereas Pope Francis was not afraid to speak his mind and was very much out there on issues. Pope Leo has played the game very carefully. I think he, to a certain extent, is focusing on uniting the church. But, as you say there, the conservative branch and the more liberal dimension of the church. He was in Turkey over the past few days, met with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey's president, and today and over the next few days he's in Lebanon, a country 1/3 of which has a Christian population. So there is quite an affiliation or a love for the church and for the Pope in Lebanon. And of course it's a country that has been scarred by war over the past few years, whether it's Israeli incursions and the war with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah even welcomed the Pope's presence over these next few days. But then you have economic crisis as well, and that awful explosion that happened in the port in 2020.
Dreadful, yeah. Dreadful. I remember the images of that. So well. Before we wrap up then, what else have we got? Trump again paused all the asylum
this was in response to the shooting of those 2 National Guards in Washington last week, one of which has sadly died. Trump, of course, it was an Afghan immigrant who was said to be the shooter and
who had worked with the CIA.
In Afghanistan. So you would imagine he would have been vetted and stuff like that, but he obviously took a turn. The Trump administration has paused all asylum decisions and stopped issuing visas to Afghans following that shooting. So this just underlines the consequences of doing anything wrong in America. He is one person. But this falls on the entire Afghan population in the US. Now, Mr. Trump has taken action against a lot of them and has vowed a crackdown on immigration from, he said, third world countries, developing countries. Hardline policies from the Trump administration, but that's nothing new.
To Indonesia there, and a catastrophe happening.
I have 300 people killed in the past week in flooding and landslides. It's gone up to above 400 now, above 400. More than 100 people are missing in Sumatra, which is a western islands. Heavy rains have deluged Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and it's all because of a tropical storm in a section or a passage of waterway known as the Malacca Strait. Some people will be familiar with it. But you have the army being brought out to join relief efforts. It probably hasn't got the news attention it's deserved because of everything else that's going on. But certainly it's a pretty torrid situation, and it's probably evidence of climate change to a degree.
Yeah, a lot of news though about that awful fire in Hong Kong as well, and that's ongoing in terms of investigation, isn't it?
And it has terrible echoes of the Grenfell Tower fire in London a couple of years ago, except it was greater in scale. It was a couple of tower blocks, and you have people who have been brought into custody. It killed at least 128 people. That death toll might even rise a little bit further.
Yeah. There's people still missing, isn't there?
There are people. There are plenty of people still missing. Yeah. 11 people arrested so far in corruption and negligence charges. Something to do with the cladding. There was this famous bamboo scaffolding that people will be familiar with when they see images of Hong Kong outside the skyscrapers, and that was said to have contributed to the inferno.
Yes, it was the quality of that cladding, I think, is in question. Is that?
Yeah,
is that
that's
it?
exactly it. And that there'll obviously be huge repercussions for that. Hong Kong obviously is in a difficult place politically, in the sense that it's
Sure.
effectively part of China, but has its own political system. But in fairness, I think a lot of people will get behind. I mean, this is a devastating tragedy, and the thing is, it probably could have been avoided.
Well, dreadful indeed. So much stuff going on around the world, Thomas. We could do hours of this every single week. Anyway, great to see you as always.
Thank
Thomas,
you, Fran.
and thanks very much indeed for that. That's Thomas Conway of the Nina Guardian and our global news slot. News and information's coming up.
Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, puck on. It's time to change. Test drive the award-winning range of Peugeot hybrids and fully electric vehicles at Slattery's Garage today. See slatterysgarage.ie.